So let's talk about the pulley system. The first thing you should note is that when you're using the pulleys and it's not attached to the glide board, it becomes 100% of the force that's required to move. So if Jeff here is doing a row, or let's say he's doing a squat, it's equally the same force at this incline level. You can refer back to your chart that you received when you purchased the Total Gym. It will tell you how much actual resistance it takes to move at this incline level. But to make this exercise easier, and oftentimes what pulleys are doing with the Total Gym, is that we have them attached to the glide board. So the point I want to make is that if you have these rail latches and you want to do full resistance and you don't want to increase the incline, you can attach it to one of these rail latches, but if you're going to use the pulley, do not attach it higher than that of the lap bars. They always need to be lower down. So I'm going to disattach the pulley, and once I do that and bring it to the glide board, now remember how we talked about safety and anchoring? If Jeff was standing, then I would remember this is where we anchor, and this is or knuckle down for safety. So if he's doing a row here, we now take that resistance and we cut it in half. And this is where it can get a little technical, but it's important to know, especially when you're working with patients, because just the slightest amount of increase in resistance can really make a big difference. If I want to decrease the resistance even more, what I would do is take one handle and let it go, and now Jeff will be moving one handle. This is about 33% of that amount. And now if I want to decrease it even more, I'm going to just have him hold the handle, and then he's going to move one arm. Now with this said, note that now he's holding this handle. That requires a stabilization factor. So sometimes when I'm working with the patient and I'm really just trying to get shoulder stability, I might have him just be holding this handle and be moving the stronger arm. And this is just working on stabilization, and he's moving the arm in varying planes and working on that stabilization. So that's a really other way to think about how to use the pulley. So next, moving on with respect to mobility and force. So now that you have someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of mobility, you might want to have them change the pulley pin position. So I'm going to have you anchor down, and I'm going to have him go into what we call upright supine position. So I'm going to have you lie on your back, and oftentimes I am handing them the pulleys in the beginning. And I'm going to have his feet go onto the glide board. If he needed to self-spot, I could. Or if I want to decrease the incline, remember, I can do that too. And I'm going to have his arms reach back overhead. Now sometimes this is too much for someone to actually do. So I will have your feet go on the floor, and I can bring the pulleys up into a position that is just a little bit higher. And now this might be just where he needs to be. So now we can either do a pull down, or let's go into a pull over. Because now I'm going to talk about range of motion and force. This is where it kind of gets a little overlap between the components. So when I'm working with someone and I have adjusted the pulley pin placement, or the clamp position rather, I am changing where the force is delivered in the range of motion. So we're going to back up a little bit to biomechanics. And remember, when something's around 90 degrees, when that weight's at around 90 degrees, it's the greatest force that might be required to move. So in this position, if he was to, this is nice because you have the pulley in the position, if he was to get to 90 degrees between this cable and this arm, you can see he's working really hard, that's where it's the greatest force for him to actually pull over. So that's number one. Number two, if I have someone who needs more force and they're further back, what I can do is have his place his feet on the ground and then bring the pulley down. And now when he does the pull over, that 90 is going to become hit sooner, earlier in the range of motion. So now the force is back here. So when you start to move the pulley pin, you're redirecting that force. So oftentimes I'm working with people, I haven't even changed the incline, but the exercise and the strength feels very different for that participant, because I'm really trying to tweak where they're getting the greatest amount of force in the range of motion. So I want to highlight this again. So here I'm going to have you come up to sitting. So you're going to straddle. I'm going to take a hold of your handle, and I'm going to have you go into the seated lateral position. So I'm going to bring the board to parallel because we can. So you're going to stand up. You'll anchor down back to sit. So we're going to go through a chest fly. So if he has the front handle, and I'm going to bring this up So now the force is more aligned. So he has a better line of pull, I should say. If it's down here, it's more of an incline that he'll be working towards. So now we're just gonna come right across. So here we go. We're gonna just go through a simple chest fly. If I was to look at that 90-degree, he hits it about here in the range of motion. But if I want him to, let's say, hit it back here, he needs more force back here. A tennis player, for whatever reason, he needs it back here. What I can do is I'll have him put his feet down, and then I'll change and use the back handle. Because now what's going to happen is, if you can see, he's going to come across, he'll hit that earlier in the range of motion. Now if I'm working with him and let's say he needs more of a pushing here, he needs more force, more in line, right and direct with his body, what can I do? Well, this is where we kind of get into the programming a little bit, but I'm going to tell you now. Here's what you can do. You can knuckle down, or I can actually just take the handle. He's then going to take the front handle, because we know the force gets a little bit later in the range of motion, and then I would tweak him a little bit. So now he's going to turn his body toward the tower, and then he can pull across, and now that 90-degree is pretty much at the end of the range of motion. So these are just the ways to think about when you're adjusting the pulley, and how you can take an exercise and really start thinking outside the box of different ways you can tweak just a simple chest fly. So that's kind of where you have strength and mobility coming into play. The other element is we have awareness. So what I love to do is I'm going to have you go back into the pullover position. So I'm going to bring your board down. And we're going to go back into doing pullovers. I'm going to leave the pulleys where they are. He's going to lie on his back. Feet will come up into the glide board. And I really encourage you to try to feel these exercises for yourself. I know it's a video that you're watching, but if you can take some of these components and some of these exercises and feel them in your body, you'll really feel how just little tweaks of the machine can make such a difference in how the intention of that exercise comes to play. So I'm going to have him do a pullover right to his thighs. Now, one thing we do is called static equilibrium, and that means one arm goes back and then you switch. The board stays still, but the participant moves. That's static equilibrium. Now another way to add that stabilization proprioception is I'll have him take his right arm and keep it by his mid-thigh. And now let's say I'm just working one arm. Not only is this stabilizing the shoulder, it requires trunk stabilization. All the nice components are coming into play. If he keeps moving that left arm, but the right arm comes up, and now he continues to move, this right arm is getting a very big workout. It's really working on stabilization. Like I had mentioned before, you can have this arm be in varying positions as that left arm's moving. And my intention might be more focused on this right arm. Maybe they're here as a patient for right shoulder work. So this is just another way to think outside the box of why might you be doing this exercise. So bring your arms all the way over and you can come up to sitting. So when you're working with the pulleys, there's a lot to consider. One is when you change the pulley, you redirect the force. When you change the pulley, you can also vary where you are in planes of motion. That's really nice so that you're not always stuck in a single plane. You can start adding varying directions. And when you're working with the pulley, you can add that static equilibrium, bringing that stabilization element of an exercise to another level. So that's the arm pulley.